in projected for for calendar year 2011, declining to somewhere around $1 million in 2027, and then declining further, as you see there, as the pool gets smaller over time. So that's the challenge facing us is how do we take that limited amount of money, that $9.7 million that we have currently invested to make these benefits payments, how do we bridge that with those resources to what is the projected volume of payments that we must make? And there are several ways we can go about that, and I've illustrated them here for you based on a 6% annualized rate of return. Again, no one knows what the rate of return will be on the assets invested. The green, this just shows what would happen if we didn't begin more aggressively supplementing the fund. Well, the assets invested in the fund would run out in about 7 years. That's the green bars. That's the assets of the pension funds. The red bars would then become, I've labeled it general fund, but those are obligations of the city to the fund that if they're not assets in the pension fund must be made up from the city's general fund. So in this illustration, which I don't believe any of us would believe is a reasonable or practical course of action, but it would show us if we took no action in 7 years, that we would be faced with an immediate due bill of about $1.5 million beginning in 2017. So we would like to look at other options. Here's another scenario where if we began next year putting about $660,000 of the new expense in the city's general fund into the fund, and if we did that through the year 2035 when the benefit level reached decline to that point, that we could, that's one path we could follow. And you see that would sort of stretch the life of the proceeds from the currently invested pension fund a little bit further out than obviously the other scenario would. But essentially the bulk of the obligation will be addressed from the general fund. Another scenario, and one that we intend to suggest we'd like to build our budget around, is a plan that would essentially say that the taxpayers of next year and the taxpayers of the subsequent 20 years would sort of have a proportionally equal stake in making up this shortfall. And that is, we try to hold the investment into the pension fund at about 1.6% of our general fund. So it would grow over time as we assume that the general fund revenues due to just general economic growth would grow over time, and that would peak out at the point where they intersect at about $850,000 of annual contribution in the year 2030. So if that makes sense, what we're proposing there is a sort of a smoothing of the impact of this obligation for the next 20 years, and then of course we would be benefiting from the fact that the obligation as a whole would be declining from that point forward. So in the absence of additional questions or direction that we might receive from you, this is the approach we intend to show you in the form of the budget in the coming weeks about how we think is the most equitable way to grapple with this difficult obligation. And obviously we emphasize, as we have in every discussion of this, that there's a lot of layers of uncertainty with this. There's investment performance uncertainty that we all would recognize and deal with. There's the behavior of the beneficiaries and the uncertainty that comes from those type of things, and as those overlap and intersect, and obviously we cannot control at this point future budgets, but you see as this extends out a generation here, and we think it's important to be proactive and responsible and to have a vision in mind about how we'll make up that difference, and we think this is a reasonable sort of policy approach to doing that. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have about our thinking on this issue.
Any questions of Mr. Mayor? No. Mr. Story, do you anticipate any kind of increase? We're obviously supplementing or borrowing from the general fund. Do you anticipate having to have a millage or tax increase?
No, sir. We intend, or our expectation is this becomes in the red bars that you see are the red pieces. The green pieces, of course, coming from the pension fund, but the red bars become annual expenses of the general fund that would escalate like that over time. So we have to build that into the base assumptions going into every budget, is that we're going to have to make that level of expenditure. Of course, the relationship that it has with all the other things in the general fund, it's a dollar for dollar situation. But as we've discussed from the very beginning, if we're able to, if the stormwater utility proposal were to pass, that would create some space in our general fund where we could absorb some or all of that 2011 red line, and without other impacts to other unrelated programs or services.
We're walking a fine line here, are we not? Just assuming that we're going to have an increase.
Yes, sir, we are.
It's going to be. We're thinking optimistically about this, aren't we?
Well, and I think that's sort of counterbalanced by the fact that historical rates of return would be higher than 6%. So it's sort of an interplay about, we just don't know. We want to be conservative. We don't want to create an expectation that we are healthier than we are as regards to our pension obligation, but at the same time, we don't want to be overly pessimistic about where we are. We want to strike that right balance. So we think a 6% return rate for the sake of discussing these scenarios is reasonable. We also think it's reasonable to project some revenue growth in the general fund that would allow for that upslant through 2030. Of course, every budget needs to be set in the one year to the next, and we don't know what future councils would do. Ideally, we'd have a higher than that rate of return, and we could sort of smooth out the top of the red bars. If you sort of look at that peaking in 2031, obviously the more success we have in the investment market, the more opportunity to sort of smooth out that peak and draw that down. But the key point is substantial additional expense to the general fund is the only responsible way to try to get to it over time, we think, one way or the other.
So you're going to make us pay for it?
Got to order, sir.
Oh, sorry.
But to the gentleman's point, there is no one else to pay than the people who live and invest here. It's a legal obligation of the city of Spartanburg, and the city of Spartanburg is only made up of the people who live and work and invest here. There is no one else to turn to for this obligation.
Any other questions? Chris?
Thank you.
There's consolation, according to the Wall Street Journal, there's not a pension fund in the United States that's healthy. Everybody's struggling with the same problem, even worse than we are. So, Part 7. Placing Beaumont Village neighborhood on the local historical register for the city of Spartanburg, and to accept the proposed Beaumont Village design guidelines as the standards that will govern and proposed Beaumont Village Historical District. First reading. Stephen Monroe from, let me say this, Steph, before we start. We're going to ask the audience to keep the comments to themselves. If you can't do that, we'll ask the policeman to take you outside. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Before you tonight is the request to designate the Beaumont Village as a local historic district, and along with the guidelines that you've received at the last meeting in March. Just to kind of reorient you again, this is Isom Street, Beaumont Avenue, and East Boundary Drive. We're looking at approximately